Hi, it's Shaun from Flickering Myth here, and this is my review of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which comes out this Friday. A little bit of housekeeping first. A review copy was provided by Square Enix, of course, and all the footage you're seeing in this video review is from about the first half hour of the game, so there's nothing particularly spoilery here. Okay, on with the review. The marketing for Shadow of the Tomb Raider has marketed this as sort of the epic, climactic entry into this reboot trilogy, and while it's far from a perfect game, it is an extremely slick, enjoyable entry, and I feel like if you're a fan of the previous games, you will have a blast with this for the most part. I won't speak too much about the story because honestly it's not that interesting, but it opens with Lara basically triggering a cataclysmic event, and the game's marketing kind of hinted that this was going to be a much darker game than the previous entries, and it was going to question Lara more, painting her as like a predator type villain almost, and like addressing the fact she steals artifacts from ancient cultures. For the most part, interesting ideas though they are, they're just window dressing for what is mostly a pretty regular action-adventure game that doesn't do anything too radical or provocative. If you can accept that, this is a really enjoyable action-adventure game. Something I really appreciate about it is the pacing. For starters, it's not a particularly long game. If you stick to the critical path, it takes about 8 to 10 hours, and there's not a lot of combat in it, which was a pleasant surprise to me because I always feel like the shooting and the stealth is the worst part of these games. It just feels kind of arbitrary and forced. So I was quite pleased. The puzzles and the exploration are at the forefront of this game, and shootouts and stealth sections are very few and far between. Altogether, this is a quite familiar but well executed game. There weren't many moments where I wanted things to move along faster, and while the story and the villains are quite simplistic, the game is elevated significantly by the brilliant hub worlds, especially the ancient city of Paititi. This sprawling world that feels very much alive, and it's rife with side missions from admittedly the mundane to the absolutely epic. I really liked that you can stumble across additional tombs that are off the beaten track, and that will surely be music to the ears of the fans who feel like these games don't really do enough tomb raiding. Not all of the side content I played was particularly meaningful or interesting, but it definitely expands the lore and adds a few relaxing hours to what is basically a very tight and snappy game. It's also shockingly easy, even though these games have never been particularly difficult. On normal difficulty, the combat is just an absolute cakewalk. You never run out of ammo or have to struggle against too many enemies. The puzzles don't require more than a minute or two of thought. And then you've also, if you press R3 on the PS4 version, you get survival instinct markers which tell you where to go and what to do. It's very, very simple. But if you do want to make things a little harder, there is the now expected dynamic difficulty settings, which are quite extensive, and they will make things harder or easier if you really wish, so that's great. So yes, if you're a fan of the series, Shadow of the Tomb Raider basically offers up the same enjoyable, Uncharted-esque gameplay. There's not a ton of innovation, and there were a few set pieces to me that felt kind of copy and pasted from earlier in the game, and that seemed kind of lazy, and the final boss just fell completely flat for me. I thought it was very boring and uninteresting, and I could have done without it completely. However, the experience as a whole is breezy, and yet it's not too simple, if that makes sense. There are the usual skill trees, upgrades, collectibles, what have you. And if you're into collectathons, there is a lot here to pick up. A lot of which expands the lore of the world, which I thought was kind of interesting. In terms of visuals, the game isn't a top tier AAA offering by any means, but it definitely looks good. I recently treated myself to a 4K TV, and the game's HDR presentation was absolutely stunning. Considering this is a Tomb Raider game, is always going to have heavy interplay between light and dark. So it was a good game to test HDR on. Cones of light, they don't look like the pre-rendered kind of blocks you expect, but they actually felt organic and kind of alive. However, hair and lip sync look ridiculously bad in this game, like it was really off-putting. Square Enix have promised a day one patch will fix this, but you know, just wait and see. The sound package is meanwhile rock solid for the most part. Camilla Luddington once again makes for a personable Lara Croft, and the musical score was actually really distinctive and diverse, especially when you first arrive at one of the hub worlds and it sort of just opens out in front of you. I thought the music was just wonderful. Overall, this is a very easy recommendation for fans of the previous games, and just overall people who enjoy slick AAA action-adventure titles. If you're hoping for a god tier reinvention of the franchise, you might be disappointed, but it is definitely a fun sit, and there are some really nice nostalgic moments that definitely shouldn't be spoiled. And it also has some of the best pacing of any blockbuster game I've played this year. So, Shadow of the Tomb Raider gets an 8 out of 10. Thank you very much for watching, and you can check out my full written review of the game on flickeringmyth.com.